Hi, I'm Ryan.
Hey, I'm Jess, and this is Your Therapist is Not Okay.
Today we are going to talk about the topic that not all therapists are created equal. And how do I find a good one?
In this economy?
Welcome back to the new year and a second season of Your Therapist is Not Okay. We are really excited that you have continued to listen and engage with us. And we're really excited for another season of tackling listener questions, continuing to delve into difficult topics, and we're also going to have some special guests to talk about specific topics, including psychedelics and therapy and EMDR.
Yeah. So today's episode is a little bit of a spicy one.
Ooh.
Yeah, we're starting this new year off with controversy, baby. And that's that we don't think all therapists are created equal. And so in this episode, we're going to be diving into that. With more and more therapists coming into the field, what advice might we have for clients on how to find a good one?
Mm, yep, absolutely. It can be so difficult to navigate
Mhm.
finding the right therapist. And that's really the first thing that we want to tackle in this. Um, so I'm kind of curious what you would say, Jess, about what makes it difficult to find the right therapist.
Hmm. Well, I think schooling, modality, self-awareness. I've had many clients that come into my office actually having a bad experience with a
Mhm.
past therapist. And part of our work in therapy is actually having to tackle that. And so with so many therapists in the field, I think it can almost feel impossible. There are thousands of practitioners on psychology today, which is the main platform that a lot of psychologists use. Not everyone, but a lot of people will use.
Yep.
It can almost feel impossible to find the quote unquote right therapist without it feeling like online dating,
Mm,
like going after profile. It can feel very tricky.
yeah. Yeah, and I know that that's a kind of allegory. I don't know if allegory is the right word that you've used for a while. That it shouldn't be as hard as online dating to find a therapist.
That is the tagline on my website.
And it's a beautiful website.
Thank you.
But it can really feel like that scrolling through this list of faces and names. And I've done it. I've looked for therapists myself,
Yeah.
and I've too been in that moment of kind of overwhelm and like, who are all these people? How do I know who's going to be the right fit?
Yeah.
How do I tell them apart? The pictures are tiny and grainy, and like, sometimes the profiles don't say very much.
Mm,
So I want to start just by acknowledging that this can be really difficult.
absolutely. And by the time you're kind of looking for a therapist, you're in a vulnerable state usually. You know you want to make a change or you want to tackle something. You want someone to talk to. And now you have to go through this Rolodex of thousands of people, try to base who you think might be able to help you on a picture, on a profile,
Mhm.
and then reach out to them. And sometimes after you've done all that work, they don't even get back to you.
Absolutely, that kind of thing maybe won't get back to you, or maybe they will get back to you and say, sorry, I'm full.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, in some ways, like even the process can feel daunting. It's all on a client to make all that move. I have no idea how to make that different, but it can feel tricky. And having a first consult, what I tell all of my supervisees is
Mm,
that the client will be more nervous than you.
mm-hmm.
It is their story they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's them having to dive into their depths. Um, and for a lot of students, they don't always realize that. They're all nervous, like, about doing a good job, and I'm like,
Oh
"It
yeah.
is the client that will be doing the scarier part of this work."
Mm.
Yeah,
Another thing that I acknowledge, as insiders in the psychotherapy world,
sure.
we understand a lot about, the different modalities and the different types of licenses that we might see on psych today. I've talked to friends and family members that are like, what does any of this mean?
Mm,
And I think, in particular, thinking about in the States, we have all these different license types. And I know there's several different ones in Ontario as well.
mhm,
So it is very difficult to know, I think, as a common layperson
mhm.
that's not a therapy expert, to kind of think like, well, what does CBT mean? What does EMDR mean? What is psychodynamic? What's the difference between a social worker and a psychotherapist and a psychologist and a psychiatrist? Even as I start to list them, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a whole complicated system.
Yeah,
And knowing how to navigate that to get your needs met is quite difficult. And I would say
absolutely.
most people don't have that baseline knowledge. Now, some people have been navigating the system for a while and are very savvy, right?
Mhm.
Kind of know how to get the type of support that they need. But I think, yeah, that's definitely one of those barriers.
You know what? Let's
Wow.
answer that exact question at the very end, Ryan. So
Oh,
we'll go through the Rolodex and actually just explain it so that anyone listening to this can come away from our episode being like, now I know.
you know what I've been thinking?
What? What are
I
you
love the
thinking?
term Rolodex. Like it captures something so well and it also dates us so severely.
Okay, I was thinking that too, but I was like, I'm keeping this. I'm a dinosaur and I'm happy to
Ah,
be one.
I was thinking about what's the drag queen that talks about having a Rolodex of hate when she's reading people?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't think of her name right now, but anyway. Um, yeah,
I think that we should move on from that.
I think that we should as well.
But I think that like there are key things I think when I like kind of start to navigate this of like what sets a therapist apart from another.
Mhm.
And I have some ideas about that, but like I'm curious what your opinion is. Like what actually makes a therapist really good? And what makes somebody kind of a bad therapist?
Mm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that really stand out for, how someone is a good therapist is it's really going to be about the quality of training that they get.
Mm,
Um, which in some degree is about, what school they go to. And this is, based more on, in my mind at least, what schools push students to do their own work and to do kind of experiential learning practices. It's not really just about what universities maybe have more notoriety. It really is about the quality of the training program. And psychotherapy training is so different than most university coursework that it kind of doesn't always fit well into the university system.
mm,
So if you're looking to be a therapist, I would be very discerning and figuring out what exactly is this program going to offer you
mm,
and how does it differ from others.
mm.
Um, and I think one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is the quality of supervision that someone gets.
Oh, say more about that. Why supervision?
Supervision, so much of what we do we have to learn through experience, right? You need to have enough skill and to get started and take care of clients safely.
Mm,
But after that, you're going to be having weekly or maybe more frequent consultation with a supervisor while you're working towards your accreditation or
mm,
completing your degree requirements. Pretty much everywhere in the world, there's practicum kind of requirements for becoming a therapist because of this on the job learning. In some ways, it's no different than being a plumber or a contractor, right? You need hands on experience to really know how to do the job.
yep.
And that supervision means that when someone is struggling, someone needs to be maybe pushed and challenged
Mhm.
to have a clearer perspective of what's coming up for their clients, or needs someone to be kind of a therapist to them about therapy
Mm,
to help them have those insights, help them stick to kind of the foundations that you have to stick to
mm.
in order to keep clients safe and help continue to help clients reach their goals as much as possible.
And I think like what you were saying about that aspect of schooling is that I don't know if it's been your experience in the United States, but I think in Canada, one of the reasons that really brought me to Edinburgh
Mm,
was that I actually really wanted to do the work myself.
mm,
I wanted a program that was actually going to teach me about where my pitfalls are.
yep.
We've said this in season 1, we called it the shadow.
Hmm.
And the shadow is really what is the thing that I'm struggling with that I may not even want to acknowledge, or what are my hidden motivations to be a therapist?
Hmm.
I really wanted a program that would make me go there
Mm,
and would make me have to really look at who I am as a therapist, not just what I know.
Mhm.
And I didn't see hardly any programs in Canada that were that rigorous
Mm.
and would allow me to look at my own stuff. Now, that's not therapy, that was in the program.
Mhm.
Every essay we had to write was like taking what we were learning and really diving into it in a really self-aware way. And we got graded on self-awareness, not
We
just our
did.
writing.
We did. And, that would be, really integrating it into understanding our own development,
Yeah.
our own past traumas, as us basically being our first case study
Yeah.
was us.
Exactly. We were kind of our first client in a very intellectual, but also personal way.
Mhm.
And what we're really saying there is kind of about transference and countertransference.
Mm.
Transference is recognizing in some ways what would a client necessarily use us as? What might we actually look like to a client in the therapy room? That'll change from client to client,
Mhm.
but being able to navigate that and use it for the work, or thinking about our counter transferences, about how might we view clients based on our past?
Mhm.
And who might we be actually nervous to work with? I
Right.
ask my supervisees this all the time. Is there anyone you're nervous about? And sometimes it's not just about a presenting issue. It might be I'm nervous to work with a powerful man
Mm.
because I actually am a little nervous that I'll fall into patterns like I did with my father.
Mhm.
Like these kinds of things are actually brilliant and they make a good practitioner because you know it going in, so you're not bringing that in necessarily to the space unaware.
Yeah. And that kind of comes in full circle with the supervision, right? So
Yeah, it does.
a good supervisor will push and challenge you to own those parts of yourself,
Yes.
right? Will push you to apply your theory and your learning to yourself and to listen to those transference and
Mhm.
countertransference signs and use them as information,
Yes.
right?
And I think that like I know we're psychodynamic. We use psychodynamic terms here,
I do.
but what I'm saying right now, I think applies to every single therapist.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't think it matters what modality you have. You're still in the room with a client
Hmm.
and you're still being viewed by that client and maybe wanting to seem powerful or impressive to that client.
Hmm.
And if you don't do your own work to kind of know what those things are, I think that that can make you a bad therapist because you'll bring your own stuff into the room. You might over self disclose. You might try to constantly have the session being about how impressive you are.
Hmm.
So a client maybe doesn't feel safe to say you got it wrong.
And that pressure that can be inadvertently created, that pressure to get better,
Yeah.
to heal faster, to show signs of progress where it may or may not actually exist. At the end of the day, it's all, you're right, whether it's psychodynamic or CBT or whatever,
Hmm.
it's still a relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what all the data has pretty consistently shown
Yeah.
when research is done that compares modalities is whatever the modality, it's the relationship that matters the most. A
Exactly.
therapeutic alliance is often the term that they would use in the research.
Yeah. You know, I actually have an example of this.
Oh,
I one time had a therapist that every time they gave an interpretation, she'd nod her head.
to agree with herself, whether you thought she was right or not.
And she'd be like, "And so it all does stem back to this," and then nod her head, "Mhm."
Hmm.
And I'd be like, yes, okay. That's fascinating." I'm like, "You just I didn't say anything."
Oh my goodness. That's hilarious.
And I think that's what I'm talking about, like, you bring yourself into the space, don't you?
Mhm.
And I felt very unseen in that therapeutic relationship.
That and actually those little things that have nothing to do with modality and are more about how we communicate
Yeah,
with our clients,
yeah.
how we are, open to curiosity about whether we got it right or wrong. It's not about making a sale. I'm thinking about an example from my own therapy as well.
Ooh.
Right. S- Quite a few years ago, I guess now at this point, I had one of these all-inclusive insurance programs that we have in the States where every provider that I would see was part of this like same little network.
Mm.
Um, and I'm not going to be specific because I don't think that's necessary. But
Mhm.
I was very unimpressed with the way they did therapy, the way they did their mental health support. And the real trouble for that with the person that I saw at the time is we had one session.
Okay.
One session. I was going through some difficult stuff. We had one session. We never talked about diagnosis,
Hmm.
which is okay. That's not always going to be the topic of the first session.
Of course.
Depends on the person and the rules where they're working. But then I got a little notification from my all-inclusive insurance thing that was like, doop doop, new diagnosis. And I felt very kind of confused and betrayed. This person that I had so briefly met and hadn't mentioned a word of it to me gave me a pretty impactful diagnosis.
Wow. And
Never said a word about it to me.
never talked to you about it. Just assume that they knew you as soon as you kind of walked in the door.
And I saw them 2 more times,
Oh.
and they still never mentioned it.
Hmm.
So when I think about ways where the way we communicate and the way
Okay.
we consider our impact on clients from our actions, our professional
Mm.
actions, is that foundational part of the relationship that in some context and in some trainings might get lost.
Mm.
There's no modality that says don't share the diagnosis with the client. Like that's not a thing.
That's not a thing.
But that's just kind of a sloppiness. And I think if you're really thoroughly principled to always consider the client first, which
Mhm.
comes from good supervision and good training,
Mhm.
then that's something you'd flag.
And as we were saying before, that's every modality.
Hmm.
Like if you're narrative, if you're DBT, CBT, if you are doing any kind of somatic work,
Hmm.
the client is always there and front and center.
Hmm.
It's always about what you can offer them within the relationship because clients learn to trust you. And our words have a lot of impact.
Oh yeah.
We've joked before that sometimes clients will come back to session and be like, and when you said that, and you and I were like,
I didn't say
what
that.
did I don't recall having said that. Um, it's because actually the work we do has an impact.
Hmm.
And if you don't put the relationship first, you can forget that role of power that you have, that you
Absolutely.
getting that notification actually would have impacted you because the relationship with this person, and also that they have a position of power to have just said that about you.
Hmm.
And I think all of those things come with a need for a certain level of self awareness and recognition that what we do has to put the client first.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, thinking about, you mentioned that power differential there and the power that we kind of have
Yeah.
in the room with our clients and just in the field as well that we have to really consider and be careful with. I remember in that example wanting to talk to this therapist about that really badly, wanting to bring it up,
Mm,
but not knowing how to,
yeah.
and feeling that I didn't have that power there, that
Yeah.
I would be, stepping into danger to bring it up.
Hmm.
And that's another important thing about that self work and a good program is they make you look at your experience of power,
Hmm.
your positionality in terms of privilege and oppression,
Yeah.
and then just generally the power you'll have regardless of who you are as a therapist,
Yes.
um, so that you are really, I think we're, if anything, hypersensitive to issues of power.
Of course we are. Yeah. We've taken courses on it. We often want to try to equalize it. We'll have an episode later this season where we talk about laughter and how we sometimes will use it to equalize it. And so I think that in some ways, yeah, we're aware. But you know what strikes me with us having this conversation right now
Mm,
is that we are therapists. And as you were sharing your stories, I have three more.
mm,
We have our own examples of how therapy has actually not been positive for us.
yeah,
And we probably, in society as therapists, know the language,
we do.
maybe kind of understand the moves. And even then, we can get caught up into actually feeling kind of this wasn't beneficial. If anything, this kind of hurt me.
For sure.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that even we have our own examples. And anyone listening to
Mm,
this, I can imagine also are starting to think about examples. And it can be really tricky. One thing that I really like,
mm,
it's hard personally
mm,
because I'm a human,
sure.
but I really love it when a client can say that I hurt them.
Mm,
But is when they tell me that I might have done something that's not working for them,
yeah.
or something that feels like they just need to talk to me. Maybe I said something that offended them, or I'm doing something that's not quite working for them. We celebrate those moments because for me to tell somebody that this isn't working right now indicates to me that you want to do the work,
Yeah.
that the work's actually incredibly important for you and you want to continue it on and us to get it right.
Yes.
And for us to do that also kind of does that microcosm of the outside world of how do I take critique and use it well?
Mm.
And how do we not shame or gaslight or all those other things that you kind of want to do in some ways because it's like that I don't want to get it wrong. I want to be good. But to use and be like, that was incredible that you felt comfortable enough to say that. I could imagine that wasn't an easy thing to say.
Yeah.
And often the client will say, I was actually really nervous
Mhm.
to tell you that. That's a win for me. And I think that power differential can be really hard to tell a therapist that they've maybe missed the mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do the same thing, and I always tell trainees that like I make a really big deal, and I suggest that they do the same the first time a client corrects me about something.
Mm,
Even if it's just a little tiny thing, it was like, oh, I didn't say that, I actually said that. Just to really emphasize that you can tell me when I get it wrong,
mm,
and I will get it wrong.
mhm,
I'm aware of that, and that in some cases with a lot of clients in the past, that has actually become like a delightful thing.
mm.
When they be like, "You're no, you're not listening, you're not understanding."
Yeah,
And sometimes those are heavy and difficult moments, but in
yeah.
other times, it can be a little playful
It
where
can be
clients
playful.
are like, "Are you even listening?" I encourage and allow my clients to be as sassy as they like with me.
I like that too, because it also then equalizes.
Does.
What we're talking about is actually a really neat part of this, is that we're talking about what makes kind of not all therapists created equal, but we're
Mhm.
also pivoting to talking about rupture and repair.
Yeah,
That even though we may have done all the training, da da da, we're still going to get it wrong sometimes. And that's because we're human. And there's a distinction between kind of having power, privilege, or kind of like not doing the self awareness work and getting it wrong. Every therapist will get it wrong. Your
absolutely.
therapist will probably get it wrong. That's awesome in the sense that if they can work through it with you, then it can have a deepening of a relationship. If it's done well and it's handled well, it's not uncommon for the relationship to actually get even deeper because you've had that moment of conflict that's been resolved well.
Absolutely. And so if I'm kind of tracking what you're saying right, it really is that one of these things that sets therapists apart are what therapists are willing, able, and aware to really lean in when there's a rupture, allow for the repair, accept the responsibility, even just have their little antenna up
Mm,
to notice, oh, my client's looking dejected.
mm. Oh, or they said yes, but that wasn't a real yes. That's a
Was half-hearted.
yeah. Ryan, you just said that so much better than I could have ever said. I like that. If I heard you right and then said the most beautiful response. As you were saying that, I was like, I didn't say that, but I kind of wish I had. Thank you.
I'll be here all day.
Yes. Kind of think you should just take over. That was great.
But actually, I'm thinking that this would be a good time to kind of pivot towards what are the tips that you and I have to
Yeah.
offer for. So, you hear some of these pitfalls, you hear what are some bad therapists. How do you find a good one?
Yeah, let's do a story arc here. Let's let's wrap it up in a positive note. I think one of the big things is that it's kind of a dual thing. Have consults.
Mm,
Most therapists offer free consults. They should offer free consults, so you just get a sense to get to know them.
mhm,
And that's your time to ask any questions you want. So that's usually my biggest advice of you can have more than one consult. Um, and allow yourself, if you have the bandwidth, sometimes having to kind of talk to so many different people and like show your story can be quite vulnerable. But if you have the bandwidth to actually be able to shop around and have consults, that is your chance to be interviewing as much as it's your therapist's chance to see if you guys are a good fit.
Hmm.
So if there's something you really want, for example, you might want a therapist to be more talkative
Sure.
and might say, I really love a communicative style of therapy. I really like the idea of a back and forth. That feels really safe for me. Or conversely, you might say, I really want a space where I can vent. I'm constantly holding this thing and I can't talk about it with others. So for me, actually having this time will be important for me just for the first little bit, just to allow myself this safe hour to dump.
Hmm.
Like those are examples that you can totally tell a therapist and see if that works for them. Can ask all about what their modality is. You can ask them why they went into the field to be a psychotherapist. You can even talk about what you would want for frequency of sessions or even how you might want a structured session. If a therapist, for example, is doing an intake and you kind of want it to be a little bit more free flowing, they may say no to that, but you can ask to
Yep.
say, I'd like this to be actually just a chance to talk about my story. Can we do this intake maybe next session?
As you're saying this, it's really clearly pointing towards the most frequent advice I give to a friend or a family member or someone who's asks me, "Can you help me find a therapist?"
Yeah.
And they say like, "Last time I had therapy, I had this and I didn't like it," or "I'd really like this kind of therapist again." And that's always my advice: is
Mm,
tell them that that's what you want and need, and then they're probably going to be able to let you know if it's something that they do offer,
mm,
um,
yeah.
and if they can meet you in that.
Yeah.
But as you were speaking, I was thinking that some of the things you're saying are very self-aware
Yeah.
and have like a lot of knowledge about like maybe having had some experience of therapy. Um, so you may or may not know these things about yourself yet.
No, yeah, sure.
But once you do, ask for them,
It's a good point.
share them. Um, and I think above all, when you have that console, or even when you're looking through the Psych Today dating profiles, um, listen to your gut.
Yeah.
I've had multiple therapists in the past that I knew weren't the right fit for me, and
Mm,
I ignored that feeling.
mm,
So that's what I would really encourage people to listen to their gut instinct. And just like when it comes to telling a potential therapist the things that you might need from them that
mm,
you're aware of, if there are other things about what makes a good therapist for you that are important, don't give up on getting those.
mm.
If you want a therapist that, say, shares certain identities with you, maybe you want a therapist that has the same skin color as you or comes from a similar cultural background as you. If that's really important for you to feel understood, to feel safe, get it.
Yeah.
And that's actually a cool thing that is showing up more and more is there's smaller therapist kind of search engines um, that are specific for like I know there's one for people who are looking for an Asian identifying therapist.
Yep.
And there are many others. So if you look for those in Google, you're going to find those. And then also the bigger search engines like Today, you can filter by things like identity, modality, etc.
Oh, yeah. You can also filter for presenting issues. So I specialize in borderline personality disorder, and it's not uncommon for a client to maybe navigate through to find the BPD therapist.
Right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Yes. If whatever, maybe if you know a diagnosis that you've received in the past, or if you kind of have a pretty clear idea of this is the thing I want to work on, finding that, finding a therapist that says that, and bringing it up at the beginning
Yeah.
to make sure that the therapist can say confidently
Hmm.
that I know about that, and I'm comfortable supporting you in that because all therapists have to work within our scope.
Mm,
And we have to be very clear and upfront with clients when actually I don't know anything about that.
yeah.
Or actually, I can offer you the thing that you're asking. It's not something I've been trained in.
Yep.
I have some people in mind that do that
Hmm.
if you want to contact them.
And I think sometimes the question that I get from people that are in my life is all the letters attached to our name.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a registered psychotherapist, and
Mhm.
that means that I work independently, I can supervise, I, have had a number of years over, like, in my experience. So that's important sometimes for clients. If they've had trauma, they maybe don't want somebody who's an RPQ or an RP qualifying.
Right.
They may not want a student. And one thing in Ontario is that an RPQ might actually still be a practicum student.
Mhm.
So it's important to ask those questions about maybe what you can even if you don't know, a simple question could be, um, what kind of schooling do you have? Like, where are you in the CRPO?
Yeah.
um any student has to tell you they're a student, but at the same time it could be trying to figure that out, and to know that most of the time practicum students will be a less expensive option. Finances can be a real barrier for clients, and
Absolutely.
seeing a practicum student doesn't necessarily mean you're getting less good treatment. They'll be supervised by somebody who is an RP,
Yeah.
but it might be a financial option for you.
Mhm.
The only thing I would say to consider is that they often have the practicum timestamp. So if you want a consistent relationships with someone over time and you have a particular budget, sometimes a student might not be the best show because you will only have them, let's say, for 8 months.
Right. That's where it's probably better to look at what insurance options you have, to look at maybe nonprofits that offer longer term, lower cost therapy, or find practitioners that are able to offer a sliding scale. If you want long term therapy that's more affordable,
Yeah.
there are fewer resources.
Yeah.
There's some out there if you look for them.
Absolutely.
Um, and I guess as we're talking about all of this, I'm really thinking that a big takeaway for me in this episode is the thing that makes a therapist a good therapist is that they're going to be the therapist that asks you about some of these things,
Mm,
that says, how are you feeling at the end of this consult? Are you feeling like I've understood you? Are you feeling like we could be a good fit?
mm,
um, is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to cover?
mm.
Being, freely offering their professional experience, right? If a client asks me, what's your experience? How long have you been practicing? All those kinds of things. Those answers are free and as thorough as the client would like them to be.
Mhm. Absolutely.
When we have an obligation really to do that.
Absolutely. If if you want listeners, kind of a breakdown of different modalities. I said at the end we kind of chat about that. Thinking about time, we may not be able to get to all of them, but
Yeah.
actually I have a video that I did where I kind of break it down as if I'm in a cafe, just chatting. So I
Mm,
kind of try to make it much more accessible. And we'll link that video just so you can check it out and get a sense of like what might actually fit for you. I talk about psychodynamic, I talk about narrative, I talk about more solution based like
mm,
DBT and CBT. So you'll be able to get a sense a bit about what the modalities are, because sometimes that's also going to allow you to find a fit that also works for you.
mhm.
If you're someone that really wants long-term relational, getting to the root of the problem, maybe going to cognitive behavioral therapy might not be the right fit for you. So just things like that will make this a better experience. And sometimes actually a referral from a friend or someone else can be a really good shout,
It can be a great place to start. Absolutely.
or a clinic that's worked. Yeah, and I think that being able to really know that even if we have had a couple consults that don't work, don't give up. If you know that you need therapy, it can be really disheartening to kind of feel like you might not find someone out there.
Yeah.
But there is going to be a therapist that fits for you. And sometimes waiting can be worth it.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. Or, if you really need that support and you find someone and you think this is okay, but maybe not perfect, there's nothing that says you can't keep looking while you see someone a few times. It's a bit cheeky, but I think really the bottom line here is like, do whatever you need to do
Yeah.
to get the right therapist for you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're really not going to get that full benefit from therapy. And you can be clear and communicative about that the whole time with your therapist. And a good therapist is going to be happy to support you while you navigate that.
100%. Thanks, Ryan, for this. And thank you for listening to Your Therapist Is Not Okay.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.